become adult reality. Sometimes childhood dreams don't become adult reality. Like any good Greek boy, maybe like in this community, I went to Greek school for 6 years, learned to speak Greek before I spoke English. I actually was an altar boy for a number of years and even was the lead dancer for our ethnic Greek dance group, having the privilege of dancing before the Archbishop of the Greek Orthodox Church of North and South America, and also before Governor Cuomo's father back in the 1980s. I wasn't a really good student. I guess I was drawn to the social aspects of school more than to the educational piece. So I was a pretty, I would say, characterize myself as a terrible student. However, as I got older, I started to realize that there was a significant difference between me and the rest of the Greek community. And that difference continued to weigh on me until I had a very candid conversation with my father about race and ethnicity in my early teens. And after that conversation, which I didn't feel went too well, I must admit my parents didn't raise me to become drug addicted or to go to prison. They didn't raise me for that. They didn't raise my brother and I to end up the way that we did. They were two good people who, like many people, struggled inside of their marriage and inside of being parents. And some of those struggles impacted our family in a number of ways. In my early teens, my brother had a drug problem and ended up having a psychotic break with reality when I was about 13, he was 19. He was in and out of psychiatric wards, and that put another crack in the already tearing edifice of our family, and put a huge strain, I think, on the marriage of my parents. I made a very poor decision in my mid-teens, I think, to embrace a segment of street culture that wasn't conducive to myself or to my upbringing, and what I chose. I began to drink, I began to skip school, I began to use drugs, started out with marijuana, just like my brother, which I said I would never be like. And here I was starting a life of addiction in my mid-teens. Eventually, I was arrested in 1992 at 18 years old at my old high school. That was the first arrest I had. I barely made it out of high school. I actually was kicked out of high school my senior year and had to go to a school for a troubled youth, I'll just call it that. It was called Street Academy. It's no longer called Street Academy for obvious reasons. I don't think the name has a good connotation. However, I wasn't ready to go to college and really got heavy into a partying lifestyle, a lifestyle that wasn't healthy for me, my family, and my community. At 20, and I mentioned at 18, that was the first time I was arrested. At 20, I went to Albany County Jail for the first time. I did 5 months and 8 days, didn't learn my lesson, was released in 1994. I actually applied to a community college in 1994. While in jail, and by a miracle, I think I got in. Ended up going to a college where I continued to live a life, an unproductive life in prison. I was using enough marijuana to where eventually I felt that I wouldn't just be the user, I would be the seller. Eventually, I earned my first drug felony in 1995. It was the second semester at this college. And I came home and I had to tell my family that, hey, George is in trouble again. When I came home, something was different. It was May 20th, 1995. And as I mentioned, my brother had struggled with psychological issues for a number of years. And I came home and I noticed that my brother didn't come to meet me. And so as I looked out the backyard, the window of our backyard home, I noticed that he had a gun laid perfectly between his legs. I didn't think anything of it. I went to look for him to see what was going on, and I noticed that he had taken his life. And it's difficult to get those type of, seeing that gets, the image of it, I think, gets seared inside of the brain. And it really just broke me. Immediately, I ran through the whole house. I didn't know what had happened to the rest of my family, but it was the weekend of the Greek festival that I used to dance at. Both of my parents were there working at it, and I had to go there with a straight face and try to get them to leave because of the situation that just happened with our brother. At that time, I was 21 years old. I'd never seen powder cocaine before. And some childhood friends I want to call, started coming around and asking me if I was all right, and they introduced me to cocaine. I made a very poor decision to start using it. And from 1995 all the way to 1998, I went on a 3-year cocaine binge to where I ingested enough of the substance that I had a psychotic break with reality. One of the things I learned about cocaine is that I thought if you used enough of the substance, you would just have a heart attack and die. I didn't know that you can actually alter your brain chemistry to where it mimics that of a paranoid schizophrenic. I had no idea that that was a result of heavy cocaine use. I had gone, it's called a state of cocaine psychosis. In 1998, that happened to me. My mother found me. Ended up going to the hospital, still didn't learn. And from 1995 to 1999, because of my own actions and battling drug addiction and cocaine addiction, I ended up doing 4 county jail sentences between New Jersey and Rockland County. Remember I mentioned that I was arrested for marijuana. I violated probation twice, and I remember the judge telling me that if he ever saw me again, he was going to lock me under the jail. And I found myself in 1999 going before this judge, and I was miraculously released from 2 states with felony probation, felony parole violations. I was out within 4 months. Something happened though at this time. In 1999, when I was in Rockland County, I think this is where my faith comes in. I was in something called a dirty tank, and what it is when you first go into Rockland County Jail, you go into a holding cell before you go to your permanent housing facility. While I was in there was something called a daily word there, and I had changed my faith a number of times. I won't say what that is, but I smuggled it. I can use the word smuggle. I took it back to my cell and I began to read it. And I just have to say as blunt as I can. And this is exactly what happened. I literally called it the name of Jesus and my mind cleared up. I don't know what happened. All I knew is that I had 2 desires, and there was a verse in Psalms that really stuck with me over the years. That the Lord gives us the desires of our heart. And I noticed that there were 2 desires inside of my heart. Number one, to know what had just happened to me, because I had just radically come out of the state of cocaine psychosis. I was in it for 9 months after using the substance, and I couldn't come out of it no matter what I did. Here I was out of it, but I also realized I wanted to acquire an education. Unfortunately, I was out in 4 months, and I didn't know what to do with this quote-unquote newfound faith. I went back to a life that was unproductive, and 5 months later from when I was released, in May, this was from October 1999 to March 2000, I was rearrested. This time it was much more serious. On March 29th, 2000, I woke up after a long binge of using the drug ecstasy. I remember looking at a half-empty bottle of liquor and a half-empty bag of marijuana and thinking, is this all that my life, is this all I have to show for 26 years of life? Immediately the door came kicked open and there was it was Montreal police, the FBI, and Canadian immigration. They were looking for what they thought was an armed and dangerous bank robber. Thank God I wasn't, at least the armed and dangerous part. And I went to jump out the window. I was on the 2nd floor. The area was cordoned off. They had assault rifles aimed at the window. And I thought that I would just end my life and would hold court right there on the street, and I would go see my brother. Sometimes childhood dreams don't become adult reality. So here I was ready to jump out of the window, and I believed it was the hand of God that stopped me. And I was literally at the precipice. I was right there, ready to jump. They had the assault rifles aimed at the window. I figured that they would just shoot and it would be all over. I believe it was the hand of God that stopped me, and I got on the ground. They did whatever they did to me. Ended up going to jail. I was arrested for 5 bank robberies. I committed each one of them. And from the very beginning, I expressed my remorse, and it wasn't. I noticed something else had changed. That it wasn't about expressing remorse because I wanted to get out. I just wanted that part of my life over. And sometimes people say they're arrested. I don't think I was arrested. I was rescued. However, I found myself standing before a judge, and they offered me 30. The first offer was 30 years. I cried like a baby. It came down from 30 to 15, from 15 to 14. I ended up saying yes to a plea of 14 years. And the first jail I went to, and this talks about the criminal justice system and the prison system, was Downstate Correctional Facility, where there were at least 100 of us, mostly Black and Hispanic. I'd say about 95% Black and Hispanic, with almost no clothes on, shackled next to somebody else, hand and foot. So there was a shackle around our waist, our hands were shackled and then tied to one of the waistband, and then another shackle from there to our feet, and then shackled next, and then that shackle was linked to somebody next to us. And we were escorted, paraded through the facility to where there were places for us to be doused in cold water. From there, they shave off all your hair and erase your name and give you a number. Mine was 01A0532, and if anyone reads Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl, many of us in the master's program read that book, and we saw a deep connection to some of the things that he talks about in his book with some of our own experiences, even though I'm very sensitive to drawing some of those analogies. From there, I was told I was going to stay there. It was only about an hour and a half from Albany, New York, where I was from, and I thought, well, this isn't that bad. I'm not that far from home. Eventually, 9 days later, I found myself in Sing Sing, arguably one of the nation's worst prison. I was looking online, and it says that it was the third most notorious prison inside of the country. And while I was there, this is in 2001, I walked into the wrong section of the chapel building and realized that there was a master's program offered by New York Theological Seminary. Now, I did not have 4 transferable credits to my name. However, I knew that there were 2 desires. Number one, to know what had just happened to me from being, I believe, miraculously healed from this state of cocaine psychosis. Number 2, to acquire an education. At the time I entered the prison system in 2000, there were no higher education programs anywhere in the state of New York, except that I found out for this one master's degree granting program. So here I am by accident inside of this room, thinking, great, there's a master's program, but there's no way I'll ever get a chance to participate in it. 4 months later, and again in 2001, I found myself in Clinton. If you've been up on the news, you know Clinton was recently highlighted inside of the news because 2 people had actually escaped from there. I was in that prison for almost 2 years, and something had happened where I started working with the chaplain. I started working with the chaplains inside of the jails I was in. I joined a program that dealt with changing one's life and critically reflecting upon one's life, making better decisions, and that was the beginning of transformation, and also going to a religious retreat where we dealt with forgiveness, and I realized I hadn't forgiven my brother, I hadn't forgiven myself, and I needed to start to change my life because I knew that I was going to be released one day. I knew many people that I was in prison, and the horror stories, I won't go into them, but a lot of the people that I started in my sentence with didn't make it out. A lot of people didn't make it out. But I was confident that one way or another I was going to make it through this experience, and that I was going to do what I could to change my life. I found myself in Clinton. From Clinton, I transferred to Eastern Correctional Facility in Bard College. Had just come in and started a program. This was in 2002 when I got to Eastern. I didn't know what it was going to look like. Actually, Bard didn't know what the program was going to look like. However, they started offering courses, which eventually turned into offering associate's degrees, bachelor's degrees, a number of bachelor's degrees now. And one of the things that motivates me is that when I was accepted into the program in 2004, only 15 people were allowed entry into the program. There were 72,000 people in prison that year. That means for every one person that got in, 5,000 couldn't. And I thought that there were so many people smarter than me. And I've often wondered what those people could do with their lives. They didn't the same opportunities that I was given. So I was accepted into Bard, and I flourished. And almost 10 years to the day, I was back in that master's program in Sing Sing. This time I had an associate's degree, 2 bachelor's degrees. I had taught myself biblical Greek, studied some biblical Hebrew, church history, among a number of other topics. And I had worked as a chaplain's assistant for almost 8 years. In 2009, I was up for early release. I was one of the first people with a violent felony offense to be up for early release. However, I did not make it according to the new laws. There was a two-step process. If you're accepted at the facility there's a group of people that make a determination at the facility level. That paperwork gets sent to central office, which was in Albany, New York, and then they make the final determination. I was denied. If you had asked me then, I thought I was getting out. I thought this was God's testimony for me, that I was going to be released early, and I was going to get back to my community, and I had written to the DA of Albany, and to all these other programs saying, whatever you need me to do, I'll volunteer. I just want to do something to help. I was denied. And the acting superintendent came and told me when I had my appeal in to get out on early release. She came and said, hey, I have great news for you. I'm thinking, oh, wow, I'm going home. And she said, I called my mother, and everybody was like, listen, guess what, I'm coming home. She said, no, you're going to Sing Sing. I said, oh, wow, okay. Went back to Sing Sing for the master's program, and it was probably the best thing that happened. While in the master's program, in the second semester of the program, one of our professors used a textbook co-authored by two United Church of Christ, UCC ministers. One from the Boston area, one from the Chicago area. They just happened to be doing a book tour down the street from Sing Sing. Our professor, who was also a UCC minister, invited them in to meet with us and meet with my big mouth. I said, what's the possibility of somebody like me going to a place like Yale Divinity School upon my release? I didn't realize that one of the authors, Martin Copenhagen, was also on the Dean's Advisory Council. And he says, I'm on the advisory council. Why don't you call me when you get out? I don't think he thought anything of it. I didn't really think too much of it. But a law changed in 2009 that allowed for people with certain violent felony offenses to apply to get 6 months off of their sentence. And they were supposed to tell me in 2010 whether I got it or not. I found out 4 months before I was getting out that I was selected to earn 6 months off of my sentence. Right before that, we were watching a movie, a Christian movie, and okay. Yeah. All right. I just want to make sure that I stick to my time. All right. I'll speed it up.
It's okay. Now we're all riveted. I want to make sure we hear from our other speakers, and we can also ask the questions later and hear more. Okay.
Let me know what this one.
Okay.
I was reading in the book, Second Kings and Second Chronicles, that gives the life of Manasseh. Hopefully I said that right. The life of Manasseh, King Manasseh. And in the King's account, it ends with him destroying his community. He's considered one of the worst kings ever. In the Chronicles account, it says that he ends up going to jail, in essence, ends up captured by the Assyrians, taken to Babylon. That's a big thing himself. Taken to Babylon. We think he'd go to Nineveh. Anyway, ends up going to Babylon and calls up in the name of the Lord. And God puts him back on the throne. And there's a revival that takes place, similar to that of Hezekiah and others. And I felt that God was telling me I needed to go back to Albany, to my hometown where I once lived, to destroy it and rebuild it and give whatever life I had left to do so. And in 2011, I was released. And I was released 6 months early, just when the chaplain at the Capital City Rescue Mission, which offers services to the homeless population in the most impoverished section of Albany, New York, they offer a number of services. The chaplain had just left and they hired me as chaplain. And I served for 2 years as chaplain and assistant director of operations. I also became a licensed minister in the Baptist tradition. I believe God was telling me that I was going to work with the same DA's office that sentenced me. I ended up working with Albany's DA David Soares on youth program development and gang intervention. Worked on with a number of programs dealing with youth program development and did a lot of mentoring. And in 2012, Martin Copenhagen called me and said, do you want to come to Yale for a tour? I said, yeah, why don't I do that? Okay, that's fine. Came down for a tour. Turned out that one of my professors at New York Theological Seminary, his daughter's godmother was a professor there. We ran into him while we were there. He could have been anywhere. We just happened to run into him. And that year, some students had got a hold of this book, The New Jim Crow, Mass Incarceration, The Age of Colorblindness by Michelle Alexander. And each year, Yale Divinity School has an all-school conference where they take a week in February to address some social justice issue. Well, the students lobbied to get this book to be read for a school-wide book read in preparation for the all-school conference. And I was told that half of the admissions team was also on the team that was getting ready to bring Michelle Alexander. And the new dean was in conversation with Michelle Alexander to get her there for an all-school conference on the new on mass incarceration. And here's my application. Thank God that they said yes. Not only was I accepted, I was blessed to receive a full scholarship since being at Yale, and this is where I'll kind of end. Since being at Yale since 2013, I still miss the ministry at the Rescue Mission. However, I was able to work with Project Longevity, which seeks to reduce gun-related group, they don't want to call it gangs anymore, but group-related violence in the cities of New Haven, Bridgeport, and also in Hartford. I work for the one in New Haven with my pastor, Reverend Mathis. And I also work with Believe in Me Empowerment Corporation's Children of Incarcerated Parents program, where I work with 30 kids between 9 to 12 who have a parent or parents incarcerated. Remember I said that childhood dreams don't always become adult reality. One of the things working with these children was to see the very fear that they have of following in their parents' footsteps and having to interpret the love they have for a family member that society has described as a felon, having to deal with the prison and criminal justice system for a number of years, and then making decisions based upon that. And many of the statistics show that if you have a parent or parents incarcerated, it enhances the likelihood that the child eventually will do so. But none of these kids had dreams that they were going to go to prison. They had dreams of becoming lawyers and doctors and doing things. And I hope that my ministry, when it's all said and done, that I help some of those kids to make their childhood dream an adult reality.
Thank you. What we say in the Jewish community when we've been moved by words of someone else's, we often say Yasher Koach, which has that word straight ahead and strength in it. So, I think we should say Yasher Koach. And then you should move forward with strength. And we'll have a chance to ask questions later. It's actually Tammy's birthday today. So we're like doubly, especially honored that you chose to spend your day with us. And Tammy will speak from a personal standpoint, but also I hope start putting us now towards action a little bit too.
Well, my name is Tamara Lanier, and my name is Tamara Lanier, and I think I should start by saying probably I'm from a long line of civil rights activists, particularly my mother. My mother grew up in Montgomery, Alabama. My uncle is one who marched with Martin Luther King during the Alabama bus boycott. My mother migrated to Groton, Connecticut. My father was in the Navy, so my family from Groton moved to Norwich, and that's where I began. I began with parents who lived in the 60s during a time, a very tumultuous time, and they retained that experience. They retained the history of their family, the struggle of their family, and for my parents, particularly my mother, it was important to share that with the children. So my earliest memories of my childhood is stories that my parents told, particularly my mother, the civil rights movement, knowing her father, whose father or her grandfather was a slave. I come from a long line of people who have embraced their history, who have turned the sharing of that history to a passion for their children. My mother, when she moved to Norwich, she was one of the founding members of that branch's NAACP. And I remember hearing the stories about, at that time it wasn't a popular, I shouldn't say it's ever popular, but at that time it was dangerous to be involved or to engage in those types of activities. But my mother and a number of her relatives got together with a group of people, and they commissioned the first chapter of the NAACP in southeastern Connecticut. And so my mother was very involved, and we just tagged along. And I think out of that became that passion for me to be a social justice advocate, to advocate for people less fortunate. I started my career, when I got out of school, my plan was to be a social worker. I wanted to be a social worker, but at that time there were no positions. I was hired as a probation officer, and I thought I would hate it. And I was just going to hold that position until a social worker position became available. So I started in Willimantic, Connecticut, and I'm not sure if many even know where Willimantic is, but it's a small community in southeastern Connecticut, and there isn't much there in Willimantic. There was a thread mill that had folded and left just a community with no resources. So it was a problematic area at that point, particularly because of the heroin epidemic of the early 90s. So I started there, and I remember working with people and seeing the despair and the hopelessness and the helplessness of these people. And at that time, there was little resources that you could offer. So I had a caseload of people who had so many needs, and I couldn't make any referrals to any resource that would help them. And one of the other things, now I come again from a very faithful family where religion is our foundation. And so I remember having conversations with people about faith and looking to churches, because at that time, that's where the resources were, in the church communities. So I had to be careful in doing that, because I'm not supposed to talk about church and religion to the population I serve. But one of the memories about my career that stands out the most, there was a gentleman, and I'll just call him Joe, and he was known all across the eastern region because he had a long-standing drug history. He was addicted to heroin. He had the longest criminal rap sheet that I've ever seen, pages and pages. And there were larcenies. He was convicted of persistent larceny felonies and a persistent felon. And so I had an opportunity to work with him, and I had to do an investigation for the court. He had gotten arrested again, and he was going to be sentenced. So I had to do a pre-sentence report. Basically, it's a life study. So I met with him. I visited his family. I visited the church where he attended, and no one had anything nice, not even his mother, to say about Joe. And Joe had nothing nice to say about himself. And so, but the one thing that was amazing about him, he could fix a car, he alternators, he did phenomenal work with motor vehicles. So I'm like, Joe, you have skills, you have a talent. And then as I talked to him, he just felt like he could not be successful. He was discouraged, and he was just ready to go to jail. And there was something about that troubled me, that he just had no hope. But I continued to work with him, and then he was coming up. I had to submit my report with a recommendation to the judge for either a period of incarceration or a period of supervision or probation. And so I wanted to continue working with him. I said, we can get him into a treatment program, we can put him in a long-term treatment program, if we deal with the addiction, then we can start building a character. My boss was absolutely not, he's hopeless, he's just going to continue to offend, he needs to be in jail. So, I went back and forth with my boss, and so my boss said, okay, I'll let you recommend probation. She said, but when he recidivates, or when he goes out and he uses again, you're going to have to buy the office pizza. And I said, okay, just let me do the report, and then, I'll deal with Joe. But, so I'm driving him up to CVH, he was going to Dutcher Hall, and he shared with me that he heard that conversation, and he started crying. He said, no one has ever believed in him. No one has ever fought for him. And he didn't understand why. And he said, why did you do that? Why did you argue with your boss about me? I'm a felon. I'm, no good. And so I said, Joe, you have redeeming value. You have a talent. You have a skill. And I believe that if we can get you where you're dealing with your addiction, you can turn this around. And so I made trips up to the treatment program, I followed him through, and that was probably 22 years ago. And I stay in touch with him. He is still sober. He owns his own business. He has actually 2 businesses in Massachusetts and Connecticut, and he's doing phenomenally well. And when he started, when he would get a 6 months pen, he would come and he would give it to me. I owe this to you. And every year he comes back because there's some program in Middletown that's called Pigs in Space, but it's a big recovery event. And he comes back every year, and he's just, for me, this is what it's all about. Because at that time, in the 90s, no one cared about the population. No one cared about the people we serve. The people around me in law enforcement, because we work very closely with the police, we work very closely with the prosecutors and the judges, and everything was about just lock them up and be done with them.
5 more minutes.
So, when I came into this world, I needed to change and improve lives. So that was my goal. As I became a supervisor, I'm working with officers around me where, okay, they commit a crime, they belong in jail. Let's work on the issues. Let's work on the problems of their lives and turn that around, and then maybe they will turn their lives around. And I've had prosecutors who, they want me to violate people, and if I say I want to work with them, I've had to call my boss, Tammy's giving these offenders too many chances, she's too soft on crime, but they didn't understand what I think we're now starting to move in that direction where we can't warehouse people and not deal with their issues and their needs. Because when they come out, they're going to be that much worse than they were when they went in. So the reason why I share this is because I'm terribly excited because of all of the talk about second chances, about dealing with people as they come out of jail. One of the things that we need to be aware of is when people re-enter the communities, many of them re-enter with nothing, nobody, and no support. And they're left there with nothing else but to resort back to crime. But I'm starting to see a shift from where it was just lock them up and let's be rid of them to let's look at what these issues are and let's try to fix them. So I'm glad to be here. I want to thank you all for coming. I want to thank, again, my panel and the invitation from the rabbi. And certainly, whatever questions I'll be willing to answer. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm well trained. So I've been at the ACLU for just over 8 years at this point. I started as a litigator with the ACLU, and the very first week on my job, my boss at that time took me to death row to meet with several inmates there. At that point, we were looking at religious access, believe it or not. And for me, that was a real awakening, meeting with these people that I had only heard about or read in the paper, seen accounts in the movies and on TV. But these are real people that, for whatever reason, made bad decisions. And that many avenues in the system and the public just looked at them as a number or as subhuman in some way. So I'm going to go into briefly some of the things that Tamara